One of Vladimir Zelensky's chief aides has just admitted there was a peace deal on the table that could have been signed. Russia said, if Ukraine don't join NATO, there won't be a war, we can have peace. Then all of a sudden, the West got involved, and then Boris Johnson and all sorts of other balmy statesfolk with connections to the military-industrial complex got involved, ensuring that billions of dollars of your tax money ended up being spent on this conflict, which many would say cannot be won. It can never be successfully completed by Ukraine. So who benefited from it, and why wasn't it prevented when it could have been? This is from Ukrainian TV, in particular a show called 1+1.
Мета української делегації була затягувати процес. Мета російської делегації яка була?
Мета російської делегації була, на мій погляд, показати, вони дійсно майже до останнього сподівалися, що вони нас дотиснуть на підписання такої угоди. Щоб ми взяли нейтралітет. Це було найбільше для них.
What's important about this is its confirmation for the first time from within Zelensky's inner circle that a peace deal was an option, and that what provoked this conflict was Ukraine's intention to join NATO. There's been speculation before in Ukrainian media and the world media, subsequently the type of media that tells the truth, and God knows that's a limit in space these days, that there was a peace deal and that Boris Johnson scuppered it. But this is someone who works very closely with Zelensky, admitting Russia were willing to do a peace deal if you just get rid of those Nazis and don't join NATO. So whatever you think about those ideas and Ukraine's right to join NATO, you have to contrast that with everything that's gone on in the subsequent couple of years from an economic cost and the cost of human life, and say, was it worth it?
Справа, щоб вони готові були закінчити війну, якщо ми візьмемо, як Фінляндія колись там, нейтралітет і дамо зобов'язання, що ми не будемо вступати до НАТО.
Тільки один пункт.
Фактично, ключовий пункт був цей. Все інше там косметичні політичні приправки, типу про...
There are a few points about denazifying the place. No one likes Nazis. Well, most people don't like Nazis. That's extraordinary, isn't it? It seems like the key point, get rid of the Nazis and don't join NATO. Seems like a good deal to me.
Денацифікацію, російськомовне населення і бла-бла-бла.
I think I can translate blah 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 for you. I think that means etc. etc.
Чому Україна не погодилася на цей пункт?
По-перше, для того, щоб на цей пункт погодитись, треба змінювати Конституцію. Наш шлях до НАТО записаний в Конституції.
So Ukraine have joining NATO as a part of their constitutional agenda.
Я сказав, що ми взагалі не будемо з ними нічого підписувати. І давайте будемо просто воювати.
Okay, so there you have it. Even though diplomacy is obviously complicated and requires compromise necessarily, you have to remember that this is being contrasted with the countless deaths of Ukrainian and Russian people, decimation of Ukrainian cities, the fragility of global peace, the potential for nuclear war, and of course on the other side, tremendous profits for Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, and ability to control the domestic population. So why was it that with a peace deal on the table, that process was scuppered? Who benefits from that, and why are we not told this story? Why is it not clear to us that that was a potential outcome from the beginning? Let's delve a little deeper. In a shocking revelation, the head of President Vladimir Zelensky's parliamentary faction, David Arakhamia, said that Russia was ready to stop the fighting had Ukraine agreed to remain neutral, but the West advised Kiev to keep going. That kind of makes sense to me, doesn't it you, that a fragile peace could have been achieved, albeit one in which Ukraine would have agreed not to join NATO, but the West, for reasons of their or our own, decided to push Ukraine into war. Don't you get the idea when you see Zelensky cropping up on the Golden Globes or taking Sean Penn's Oscar? This is very much a person who's being exploited by Western interests that might be difficult to understand if you're involved in a regionalised conflict with a much more powerful nation, with a deep, complex, ethno-national divide, and formerly having been encompassed within the Soviet Union. Why, when Ukraine were on the brink of signing a deal, this is someone who was at the peace negotiations, leading the peace negotiations, why suddenly was that process disrupted? Who benefited from that? It certainly wasn't you or the people whose houses burned down in them Hawaiian fires, because that aid money could have gone there had there not been a very profitable, if somewhat detrimental to human life, war hadn't been being waged with Russia. The peace talks took place during the early stages of the full-scale war on the border of Ukraine and Belarus and in Turkey. Arakhamia said that a shift towards neutrality would require a constitutional change, considering Ukraine's current constitutional commitment to NATO membership. And I'm sure that's a real bureaucratic headache to alter a nation's constitution, but it's not that great to have all of your fighting age males murdered till you end up with an army full of the elderly fighting a war that can never be won. Arakhamia told Natalia Musichuk, a Ukrainian journalist, that Russia saw Ukraine's neutrality as a key condition for a potential peace agreement. They really hoped almost to the last that they would put a squeeze on us to sign such an agreement so that we would take neutrality. It was the biggest thing for them, he said. In a way, you can sort of see the perspective of a former world power like Russia, or as it was formerly known, the Soviet Union, yielding power in former territories like Ukraine on the basis of neutrality. You can't imagine that the United States, as is often argued, would be happy to see Mexico or Canada forming alliances with Russia or China and joining trade agreements or military organizations with affiliations to. I mean, look how ferociously the United States will defend the dollar as their global currency. It's not something they're just going to give up easily. Look at the involvement in various global conflicts right now. World diplomacy is a pretty complex thing to contemplate, and I suppose if there was a fragile and nascent peace offering available, it should have been pursued and investigated. The idea that the West somehow disrupted it is worthy of inquiry. Where's the investigative journalism into subjects like this? Why are people not investigating what the hell went on with Boris Johnson going over there? Why would that be? Is there any connection to the sort of subsequent deals with BlackRock for rebuilding Ukraine after the war? What is the intention of the United States? Why does Ukraine have these curious relationships with significant political figures like Joe Biden? What are these biolabs across the Ukraine? Why is Ukraine being set up as a kind of European battleship to agitate Russia? You notice how America likes to set up military bases around all of its enemies and infringe on all of its enemies and seems to somehow benefit from a state of constant global crisis. Well, is that why those peace deals were scuppered? Is it in any way beneficial to ordinary American people, ordinary Ukrainian people, ordinary Russian people to sustain this conflict? Let me know in the chat what you think. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's unexpected visit to Kiev on April the 9th, 2022 had an impact on the potential ceasefire. Johnson advised against signing any agreement with Russia and encouraged Ukraine to continue the fight. What on earth did Boris Johnson say to agitate these people into an unwinnable war?
Homer, I seen prize fighters couldn't take a punch half as good as you. You know, boxing might be right up your alley.
Arakamia recalled Johnson's stance, saying Ukraine shouldn't sign anything with them at all, and let's just fight. It's all very encouraging to hear Boris Johnson say stuff like that, but ultimately a significant price has been paid by the American taxpayer and by Ukrainian people more broadly. Are they any closer to achieving those goals? Is the situation any brighter after this counter-offensive that we were all meant to be so excited about? After learning that indeed it was Ukrainian special forces trained by the US that blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, do we feel any closer to a successful conclusion? Can we trust our leadership at all? Can we trust the legacy media and their reporting on it? Do you notice that much like with the pandemic period, there are sort of murmurings, hey, there was a peace deal on the table, and it's just sort of vague and unconfirmed. About a year later, yeah, there was a peace deal on the table. Same with the pipeline. Oh, that pipe, yeah, Russia did that. Won't have been Russia, will it? And then a couple of years later, yeah, sure enough, it was US special forces and Ukrainian special forces. So using that same device, what's going to happen here? Is this war just going to be prolonged, draining the American taxpayer, causing more poverty across America, draining the middle class, killing Ukrainian people, till eventually some sort of terrible, uneasy peace is achieved that somehow benefits energy interests and military industrial interests, and everyone just feels a bit drained and exhausted, and all the promises are lost in the mist of time and the fog of war? Probably. But that's just what I think. Why don't you let me know what you think in the comments and chat?